The town sat where the red earth met the long road, a place where dust rose with the morning sun and settled again at dusk. Old mud houses stood beside new cement walls, and donkey carts passed motorcycles without surprise. In the early hours, women swept their yards with short brooms while the sound of radios floated from open windows, mixing with the call of roosters. This was a town that walked with one foot in yesterday and the other in tomorrow. People greeted one another with respect, but their eyes always watched, always measured. In this place, change was allowed, but tradition still held the rope. No one said the rules aloud, yet everyone knew them. The elders sat beneath the wide mango tree, their voices slow and heavy with age. When they spoke, the town listened. A raised eyebrow could shame a man, a quiet cough could silence a woman. Children learned early that the law of the land did not live in books but in people's mouths and memories. The ground remembers every footstep, an old man once said, and no one doubted him. Here, judgment did not shout, it waited. In such a place, families were counted by their bloodlines. Names mattered. Sons mattered. Wombs mattered most of all. A woman's worth was weighed not by her laughter or her kindness, but by the children she carried on her back and the ones she left behind her. When a woman's belly remained flat, whispers followed her shadow. When it swelled, doors opened, smiles grew wider, and blessings poured like rain. Pregnancy was not private. It belonged to the family, the ancestors, and the future. It was into this world that the young bride arrived, quiet as dawn and gentle as the first light on water. She entered her husband's home with lowered eyes and steady hands, greeting elders before stepping inside. "May this house know peace," she said softly, placing kola nuts at their feet. She rose before the sun, cooked without complaint, and listened more than she spoke. When corrected, she bowed her head. When praised, she smiled and returned to her work. The women of the house watched her closely. One whispered, "She moves like someone raised well." Another nodded. Even the elders noticed her patience. She carried herself with respect, as if she understood that goodness was not loud. When news of her pregnancy spread, the house breathed differently. Laughter came easier. Hope settled into the walls. And though no one said it aloud, many believed a blessing had finally chosen that family. Yet, as an old proverb warns, when the morning light enters a house, it also reveals the shadows already inside. The news of the pregnancy spread through the house like fire over dry grass. Elders whispered blessings under their breaths while children ran ahead, shouting, "A child! A child for the family!" Pots clanged as meals were prepared, not just for daily hunger but for celebration, for life itself. The unborn child became the heart of the home, held by all, prayed over by many. Neighbors arrived, bearing gifts of cloth, kola nuts, and palm oil. Every blessing was a declaration. This child carries the family's hope, the bloodline's promise. Laughter filled the courtyard, drums echoed from the village square, and songs of gratitude rose to the sky. But as joy rang through the walls, not all hearts felt light. In the shadowed corner, the sister-in-law sat quietly, her fingers twisting the hem of her cloth. "So much laughter, yet why does it feel like they forget I exist?" she murmured, her voice swallowed by the celebrations. She was older than most of the household's women, childless, and judged by every whisper of the town. The eyes that once overlooked her now sharpened in comparison to the glowing bride. Every smile she offered carried a hidden edge, each word of advice a silent sting. When the young mother-to-be asked, "Is there anything you would like me to do for you?" the sister-in-law answered with a soft, careful tone, "No, my sister. I only hope the spirits guide you well." Yet beneath that measured voice was the coil of envy, wrapping tighter around her chest with every blessing sung for the child she could not bear. She nodded at the elders, praised the offerings, and yet in her mind, the celebrations were a knife, laughter that reminded her of what life had denied her, songs that celebrated another's rise while her own shadow grew longer. Even as the courtyard shimmered with candlelight and the smell of roasted yams, a quiet tension had begun to stir. Eyes glanced sideways, hands lingered over gifts with hesitation, and an unspoken weight settled into the walls. The child, though unborn, had already shifted the balance of the house. And in the sister-in-law's quiet contemplation, a seed was planted, one that would grow slowly, invisibly, and one day bloom into a storm that no blessing could tame. As the household celebrated, attention naturally turned toward the young mother-to-be. Elders offered their guidance with gentle hands on her shoulder, and neighbors leaned close to ask how she felt. Every question, every blessing, every smile seemed to lift her higher, as if the sun itself had chosen to shine on her. Meanwhile, in the same room, the sister-in-law felt smaller with each passing word of praise. Her place, once acknowledged in quiet respect, now seemed invisible. She moved among the people like a shadow, nodding politely, hiding the churn of bitterness that grew inside her chest. "May the spirits continue to protect you, my daughter," the eldest said, voice heavy with warmth. The young bride's eyes sparkled with gratitude, but the sister-in-law's gaze fell to the ground. "I am seen no longer," she thought. "All they see is her, all they bless is her child before it even draws breath." Outside, whispers slid through the courtyard. Women exchanged quick glances as they recounted old proverbs. "The jealous heart digs a grave even where the land is fertile." Children repeated the phrases they barely understood, the words curling around the ears of adults with knowing warning. Yet, even as the town spoke, no one truly noticed the weight settling over the sister-in-law's heart. Envy was known, acknowledged in saying, but rarely stopped before it took root. In the quiet corners of the home, her thoughts wandered. The child, the celebrations, the songs, each a reminder of what she had not and might never have. The seed of jealousy planted itself firmly, nourished by silence, by cultural reverence for life, and by her own longing for recognition. The pregnancy, a blessing to the family, became a shadow threatening her own claim to importance. The house itself seemed to sense the tension, the air thickening as if warning all who breathed it. Outside, the wind picked up, ruffling the palm leaves and scattering dust across the courtyard. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it shifted the world's rhythm. Nothing had yet broken, no words had yet fallen into conflict, yet the first signs of the storm were there. The calm before it carried a whisper of what was to come, a warning that balance had been disturbed. And in that quiet, the sister-in-law clenched her hands beneath her cloth, a breath held, a plan unknowingly forming in the shadow of celebration. Every day in the household brought a new celebration, and every celebration felt like salt on an open wound to her. The drums rang, laughter spilled from the kitchen, and neighbors arrived with gifts wrapped in colorful cloth. "Blessings upon you and your child," they said, hands pressed together, smiles wide. To the sister-in-law, each cheer, each blessing, each glow in the young bride's eyes felt like a mirror reflecting what she lacked. She walked among them quietly, nodding at congratulations while her heart clenched. "Why does it feel as though the spirits mock me?" she whispered to herself, her voice lost beneath the music and chatter. She watched the gifts pile up, kola nuts, woven mats, fresh yams, symbols of life and abundance. "They all come for her," she muttered under her breath. Every act of generosity seemed directed at her absence, each smile a subtle accusation. Even the elders, in their wisdom, could not see the shadow curling around her heart. In her mind, blessings became daggers. A soft word from the bride, meant to honor the family, sounded like insult. The world had tilted, and she felt it in every breath, every glance. Outside, the village spoke with eyes as sharp as knives. A woman's worth was measured in children, and in this, she had failed. Fertility was power, a currency of respect. She watched as the bride's belly grew, as neighbors and kin whispered their admiration. Each compliment echoed through her head as a reminder of her silence, of the womb that could not answer. Power and punishment were entwined in tradition, and she bore the weight of her childlessness in every silent stare. The courtyard hummed with life while her heart emptied. Yet, she learned to hide the darkness behind a practiced smile. "You are carrying the family's hope," she said softly to the bride, her voice smooth as silk. Beneath the calm, her mind schemed. One face for the household, another for herself. The duality became a survival tool, a mask honed over years of invisibility and judgment. No one saw the shadow that crept along her thoughts, only the gentle tone, the nods, the careful steps she took in the bride's presence. Slowly, she began to sow her influence. A word here, a question there. "Are you sure she follows the elder's advice properly?" she asked a cousin, voice light, eyes hidden. "I only worry for the baby," she added when a concerned look met her words. Doubt slipped into ears like a silent river, soft but constant. Little by little, the household began to shift. Trust, once solid, now trembled. The seeds of discord were planted drop by drop, invisible to all but her, and the family that had celebrated life together now felt the first chill of shadow creeping through their walls. The sister-in-law sat near the fire, shoulders slumped, head bowed, her voice soft enough that anyone passing by might think she was simply tired. "I am forgotten," she whispered, "left behind while life dances for others." Her words were small, but they carried weight. Eyes softened, hands reached to comfort her, and even the children looked on with pity. Loneliness became her shield, her cloak of power. Each sigh, each downcast glance, was calculated. Whether consciously or by habit, it drew sympathy. "She has been through so much," murmured a cousin. "No one sees her pain," said another. The household leaned toward her, unknowingly handing her the influence she sought. The elders began to notice, their eyes narrowing beneath heavy brows. "Have you angered the ancestors?" one asked, voice quiet but firm. "Or does she hide ill intent behind her obedience?" Another muttered that respect must be measured by action, not appearance. The pregnant bride, once the center of their concern, felt the weight of scrutiny shift toward herself. Every smile now carried suspicion, every gesture interpreted through the lens of traditional judgment. Fear whispered through her heart, reminding her that purity and conduct were constantly evaluated, and that the elders' approval could vanish as quickly as it arrived. Tradition itself began to bend under unseen hands. Protective rituals, once meant to shield mother and child, were now presented as necessities dictated by omens the sister-in-law interpreted with skill. "The spirits demand it," she said, voice trembling with false fear. Herbs were boiled, charms prepared, prayers recited with a tone of authority, yet their purpose was twisted. What was meant to guard became a snare. Obedience was no longer devotion, it was vulnerability, and every act of faith could harm as much as heal. The house felt smaller, the air tighter, as sacred customs warped into instruments of danger. Stories of old returned to life in whispers, carrying warnings that frightened even the boldest hearts. "The evil eye watches all," women said, glancing at the young bride as if she might offend unseen spirits with a careless laugh. Tales of ancestors' wrath and spirits punishing those who trespassed were repeated, exaggerated with every telling. Rational thought took a back seat to fear. A single wrong word, a glance in the wrong direction, might invite disaster. Folklore became more than lesson, it became control, binding obedience with terror. Softly, the sister-in-law pressed for compliance. "Drink this tea," she said, voice light as feathers, "to protect yourself and the child. It is the way of the spirits." The bride hesitated, sensing unease but afraid to question authority. Each ritual, each whispered instruction, seemed gentle on the surface but carried the weight of expectation. Obedience became a trap. Faith became a burden. With each nod, each reluctant gesture, the bride stepped deeper into a world where care was mixed with danger, and the line between protection and harm blurred like smoke curling from the hearth. The young mother-to-be moved slowly through the house, each step heavier than the last. Her arms ached from daily chores, though she tried to hide it, and her hands trembled slightly as she swept the courtyard. The laughter around her, once comforting, now felt distant, like a song meant for someone else. Nights were the hardest. Sleep came in fragments, and the shadows on the walls seemed to whisper fears she could not name. Her body, once full of energy, now mirrored the weight on her spirit. Every blessing, every prayer from the elders, felt like a demand she could not meet. "I must be strong for the child," she whispered to herself, pressing a hand to her belly. Yet even as she spoke, doubt crept into her mind. Had she angered the ancestors? Was her child safe? The elders' words, meant to guide, now felt like accusations. Every misstep became a moral failure in her own eyes, and the fear of ancestral wrath gnawed at her heart. Her courage faltered, replaced by an anxious obedience she could not question. Even in a house full of people, she felt alone. Sisters-in-law laughed together, cousins shared stories, but no one noticed her quiet retreat. She ate at the edge of the table, smiled when spoken to, but the smiles were thin and fragile. Her presence filled the room, yet no one reached for her heart. The weight of their attention on her pregnancy, and not on her well-being, made her feel invisible in plain sight. Beyond the walls, the village watched, and its eyes were sharp. Neighbors whispered from behind doors and fences, sharing stories of the household's affairs as though recounting tales by firelight. Hands stayed still when they could have acted, mouths moved only to gossip. The silence of the community was deafening, revealing a moral failure greater than any one family's quarrel. They knew, yet no one intervened. They had learned to let life unfold, even when it bent toward danger. Meanwhile, the sister-in-law moved through the house with a quiet fearlessness. Each unchallenged act of manipulation, each unnoticed betrayal, emboldened her. She smiled with care, nodded with feigned concern, and watched as the young bride weakened. Lack of resistance fed her courage, and the storm gathering inside her heart grew stronger with every passing day. Finally, the veil slipped. Her envy no longer hid behind soft words or shadows. Every smile concealed intent, every gesture carried a threat. She lingered in doorways, watching, waiting for opportunity. Her mind, once occupied with bitterness, now focused on action. The seed planted in silence had grown teeth. Jealousy had transformed fully into intent. A storm was no longer coming, it was ready to strike, and all who had ignored the winds would feel its wrath. The sister-in-law paced quietly along the edge of the courtyard, her eyes fixed on the young bride as she hummed a lullaby that seemed more like a prayer and less like song. Each laugh, each blessing, each touch of care directed toward the pregnancy ignited a fire inside her. "The spirits have chosen me," she whispered to herself, gripping the edge of her wrapper. "It is my destiny to restore what has been stolen from me." Her words were not loud, but in her heart, the moral line that once restrained her had vanished, replaced by a belief that her envy was a calling, a righteous claim. She rehearsed her reasoning as though chanting a sacred mantra. "Balance must be returned," she told the walls, the firelight dancing across her eyes. "If fate has favored her, then I must correct the path." In her mind, the cruelty she considered was no longer wrong, it was duty. Tradition, once a guide to protect life, had become a justification. She convinced herself that the spirits themselves demanded her intervention. Her plans took shape wrapped in kindness. "Drink this tea, it is for your protection," she said softly to the bride one afternoon, handing over a steaming cup infused with herbs. "The elders advised it to guard both you and the child." The bride accepted the gift with trust, unaware that obedience to culture had become a doorway to danger. Every ritual, every whispered instruction, seemed filled with care, yet carried the weight of hidden harm. The first step, though small, marked the point of no return. A simple action, meant to appear protective, crossed an invisible boundary. She placed a charm in the bride's sleeping room, reciting blessings aloud so that the act appeared harmless. Yet in the sister-in-law's mind, the stone had been thrown. Once done, nothing could be undone. Fate, unseen and patient, began its slow movement, shifting the currents of the household. That night, the young bride dreamed. Shadows danced across her walls, and voices murmured, urgent and pleading. Ancestors called out through the wind, whispering of danger and imbalance. She woke with a shiver, clutching her belly, the visions lingering like smoke in her mind. Her heart knew fear that her waking senses could not explain. The spiritual tension thickened around the house, warning of consequences that had yet to unfold, as the sister-in-law's intentions quietly edged closer to calamity. The old woman approached quietly, her staff tapping softly against the stone path. Her eyes, clouded with age yet sharp with understanding, fixed on the sister-in-law. "Child," she said gently, her voice carrying the weight of generations, "beware what you sow in the hearts of others, for even the smallest seed can grow into a thorned tree." The sister-in-law smiled politely, bowing slightly, yet her mind dismissed the words. Pride, respect for hierarchy, and the fear of shame in front of elders hardened her resolve. The wisdom fell like seeds on dry ground, seen, yet unheeded. Inside the house, the pregnant woman sensed the tension but dared not speak. "Should I say something?" she asked herself in a whisper, clutching her belly. The culture of obedience weighed her down. To question, to act, would be disrespectful, even dangerous. Her instincts screamed that danger lurked, yet fear and honor silenced her. Every step, every word measured, every glance wary. Inner conflict gnawed at her heart, a quiet war waged beneath polite smiles. Outside, the sky darkened without warning, and the wind whispered uneasily through the trees. Birds called out in dissonant cries, and the animals stirred, restless in their pens. Nature itself seemed to murmur that something was wrong, a warning too subtle for some but clear to those who knew how to listen. The land, like the household, shifted under the weight of unseen malice. She felt it then, a tightening in her chest, a cold shiver down her spine. "The child!" she murmured, pressing her hands over her womb. The sense of danger was undeniable, yet she remained silent. Fear outweighed self-preservation. Her mouth, which could have voiced warnings, stayed closed. Every heartbeat felt like a drum, counting down toward inevitability. By nightfall, the drums in the village seemed to change their rhythm, a deep thrum that resonated in her chest. The path before the household, once safe and familiar, seemed stained with an unseen red. Fate had begun its irreversible march. No return was possible. The calm of the morning had been shattered, and the storm, both human and spiritual, was about to break. The sister-in-law's hands trembled as she stood in the shadowed corner of the house, her breath ragged. Each laugh, each blessing, each song for the unborn child struck her like knives. The envy she had nurtured for months, carefully hidden behind smiles and soft words, had grown too heavy to carry. Her eyes, once tempered with cunning patience, now burned with a raw, unrestrained fury. "No one will see me fade into nothing," she whispered, her voice hard and brittle. "If I cannot rise, then all must fall." The chains of jealousy broke, and with them went the last threads of restraint. She moved toward the sleeping room where the pregnant woman rested, her steps quiet but her heart pounding. Rage and shame fused in her mind, convincing her that what she was about to do was justice, a balancing of fates. "They all think I am nothing," she murmured. "They will see what it means to take from me what is mine." Cultural pressures, whispers of family honor, and years of loneliness twisted her reasoning. In her mind, destruction was no longer a sin, it was duty. Under the pretense of care, she leaned close to the expectant mother, offering a hand to help her rise. Her touch, once gentle, carried hidden menace. "You must rest carefully," she said softly, her words a melody of concern. Yet each motion was calculated, each suggestion cloaked in tradition, exploiting the woman's trust. The unborn child, the symbol of hope and life, was trapped in a web of false protection. Betrayal had a face, and it was smiling as it moved. The room held its breath as tension stretched every second. The pregnant woman sensed danger but felt trapped, torn between obedience and instinct. Her pulse quickened, each beat echoing in the silence. Time seemed to slow as the sister-in-law's intentions unfolded, each act threatening to undo the fragile thread between life and death. The house itself felt suspended, the walls bearing witness to the invisible struggle, as if the ancestors themselves leaned in, holding their judgment. Suddenly, a scream cut through the air, raw and piercing. Cries of fear and pain tore through the compound, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Family members and neighbors poured in, confusion and panic etched on every face. The private darkness of jealousy had erupted into public chaos. What had been hidden behind the mask of care was exposed, and the echo of betrayal reverberated through every corner of the household. The consequences of envy, long simmering, had finally broken free, leaving the family to face the tremors of its own complicity. The elders emerged from the shade of the courtyard, their eyes sharp and voices steady, breaking the tremor of uncertainty that had gripped the household. "Enough," said the eldest, his voice carrying the weight of years and tradition. "We cannot let whispers rule over truth. Speak, child, and show us what hides behind these walls." His words rippled through the family like the wind through dry grass, forcing hesitation into the hearts of those who had stayed silent for too long. The sister-in-law's carefully constructed mask of kindness quivered. No longer shielded by smiles and subtle gestures, her composure faltered. I only wanted balance," she stammered, her voice trembling as the elder's gaze pierced her defenses. The room seemed to hold its breath, every shadow and corner witnessing the collapse of deceit. Evidence, once buried beneath politeness and tradition, rose to the surface. A dropped cloth, the testimony of a neighbor who had watched in silence, the trembling hands of a sister who knew too much, all spoke louder than any plea or denial. Family loyalty wavered as truth challenged every unspoken bond. "It is not enough to love blindly," murmured one elder, his tone calm but final. "The life of the innocent outweighs silence." Outside, the crowd that had lingered at the edge of the compound now pressed closer, shock etched on every face. Gossip, once a harmless murmur, transformed into collective horror. "How could we have stayed still?" whispered an onlooker, eyes wide, the weight of their inaction heavy upon them. The village, once a silent observer, now faced the consequences of its own complacency. The sister-in-law's pride crumbled as the elder's judgment settled upon her. The arrogance that had walked tall, untouchable, was replaced by the heavy burden of shame. "May your eyes see what your hands have done," intoned the eldest, his voice carrying the sorrow of generations. She stood, stripped of pretense, and the compound seemed to echo the lesson that had been written in the hearts of all who watched. Deceit and envy cannot hide where justice seeks its place. The courtyard was heavy with silence, each family member staring at the ground as if it had swallowed their courage. The elder's eyes swept slowly across the faces, resting on those who had looked away, who had whispered in secret, who had let envy fester unchecked. "Look at what has grown in our neglect," the eldest said, his voice low but trembling with sorrow. "Favoritism blinded you. Your silence allowed darkness to flourish." A woman's sob broke through the quiet, small but piercing, as each household member felt the weight of their failure pressing upon their hearts. We did not protect her," murmured the father, shame coiling around his words like smoke. "We let pride guide our eyes instead of justice." Regret cut deep, sharper than any blade, leaving wounds that words could barely soothe. The elders lifted their hands and spoke in the rhythm of old proverbs, drawing meaning from tradition. "Jealousy," one said, voice steady and grave, "is a curse far worse than witchcraft. It poisons homes, hearts, and the blood that binds them. It is a fire that burns those who carry it and those who stand too near." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, a lesson etched in the memory of all who listened. From the edge of the village, whispers grew into a chorus. Neighbors, once silent, now spoke together, acknowledging the wrongs that had been committed. "No longer will we turn our faces," said a voice, strong and unwavering. The village, once a silent witness, now reasserted its authority, demanding truth, balance, and care. The elders deliberated, their decisions measured, guided by ancestral wisdom. No violence was needed. Justice needed only the weight of conscience and tradition. The sister-in-law was stripped of her honor, her lies exposed to all, her presence mocked by shame rather than fear. Life remained, but respect had departed, leaving her to wander among the living as if half dead, a lesson for all who would let envy rule their hearts. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the balance of the household and village had begun to mend. Words had restored order where silence had allowed chaos. The elders nodded, satisfied that justice had been done, and that the spirits of the ancestors could finally rest, knowing their lessons had not been forgotten. The courtyard felt strangely still, as if the earth itself held its breath. What had begun in whispers and quiet envy now unfolded in ways that no hand could undo. The sister-in-law's schemes had met the measure of destiny. Without a word, the consequences arrived, not with violence, but with a weight that settled deep into every heart. "The fire we kindle in shadow," an elder murmured, "always finds its way to the surface. It is the hand of fate that balances the scales when ours tremble." The pregnant woman lay on a woven mat, her body weak but her spirit unbowed. Each breath was a testament to survival, each heartbeat a quiet drum of defiance. "I am still here," she whispered to the air, her voice trembling yet firm. "They could take my peace, but not my life. They could try, but I endure." Those around her saw not just a woman recovering, but a life renewed with courage that no betrayal could extinguish. Her eyes, once clouded by fear, now shone with a calm power. Pain had carved lines into her face, but it had also honed her strength. She rose slowly, each movement deliberate, as if claiming not only her body but the power it carried. Motherhood was no longer a burden to be feared, it was a force, a shield, a promise. "Life continues," she said softly, touching the swell of her belly, "and so does hope." The elders, who had once judged and guided with unquestioned authority, now lowered their heads. Silence filled the space as acknowledgment settled over them. "We were blind," the eldest admitted, voice heavy with humility. "We honored tradition, but we forgot wisdom. We turned our eyes away from truth, and for this, we are accountable." In that moment, respect was renewed, not through fear, but through recognition of their own humanity. As the sun spilled golden light across the courtyard, the household breathed in unison. The lessons of envy, silence, and pride had been carved into memory, tempered by justice and endurance. Life persisted, fragile yet unyielding, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, resilience, and the quiet power of a single heart could restore balance to the world. The family gathered in the courtyard, the air thick with unspoken truths. Faces once proud now carried the weight of regret, eyes lowered as each member measured the silence they had allowed to fester. "We have been blind," the eldest spoke, voice trembling with the weight of acknowledgment. "Our favoring, our quiet acceptance of envy, it has poisoned our own home." Murmurs of agreement passed through the women, the men, even the children who had watched and learned in silence. The realization of betrayal within their walls settled heavy, as if the ancestors themselves had leaned down to witness their failure. Yet tradition remained, standing tall like the ancient baobabs surrounding the village. "Our customs are not the enemy," another elder reminded, pointing to the carvings that told stories of balance and justice. "It is the misuse that corrupts them. Wisdom, not cruelty, must guide our hands." Heads nodded slowly, understanding finally that honoring culture meant separating it from personal malice. In that moment, moral clarity spread like dawn over the compound, illuminating lessons once hidden in shadows. From the shadow of suffering, the young mother rose, her body still weary but her spirit unbroken. Each breath, each cautious step, spoke of endurance beyond mere survival. "I am not broken," she whispered, brushing the dust from her robes, "but reborn through what I endured." Pain had carved into her a new strength, shaping her understanding of life, love, and the fragility of human trust. Time passed, and her suffering no longer screamed, it taught. Every scar, every sleepless night became a quiet voice guiding her decisions and her compassion. She spoke to the children, her voice gentle but firm, "Let what I endured remind you that suffering can become wisdom, if only we listen." And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the household, envy lay spent. The sister-in-law's ambition and hatred had consumed her first, leaving emptiness where fire had once raged. The elders shook their heads slowly, murmuring, "The fire that eats the one who lights it is older than any of us. Let this be the story that warns all who forget, the hands that harm life first burn themselves." The courtyard was still again, but now it held a different weight, one of understanding, resilience, and the quiet, enduring power of lessons learned the hard way. The village gathered quietly around the mother's courtyard, the air thick with the scent of dawn and earth. The child she carried was no longer just hers. The womb had become the drumbeat of tomorrow, the pulse that promised life beyond the shadows of betrayal. Villagers whispered, "In this child, the ancestors speak. Life is sacred, and we are its guardians." Every touch, every blessing, was a vow to honor the cycle of existence, a recognition that survival and hope were intertwined. Even the winds seemed to carry the rhythm of a future waiting to unfold. Yet fate had not forgotten those who sought to harm life. The sister-in-law, once proud and cunning, felt the weight of unseen hands guiding justice. Crops failed at her touch, shadows clung where light should shine, and her own mind twisted under the knowledge that destiny watches even the hidden heart. The elders spoke softly, yet their words bore the force of inevitability. "Those who harm life shall meet a reckoning that no hand can prevent." From the elders' lips, wisdom fell like footprints in ash, leaving a path for memory and morality alike. Proverb after proverb reminded the village of the delicate balance between action and consequence. One voice rose above all, solemn and clear, "The hand that harms life cannot escape judgment." The words struck deep, carrying both warning and truth that would echo for generations. Dawn broke slowly over the village, painting the sky with gentle gold where blood had once cried. The earth, scorched and silent through the night of deceit, breathed again with green shoots of promise. The mother, now weary but steadfast, felt life return, not just in her child, but in the resilience of a community that had seen its faults and learned. And though the story of betrayal and pain had ended, its lesson walked on. Children would hear the tale, elders would retell it, and every life that followed would bear the mark of caution and respect. Scars became guidance, sorrow became wisdom, and the rhythm of life, like the drumbeat in her womb, carried the promise of continuity, hope, and justice eternal.